For years, the Formula One paddock has lived under the assumption that Max Verstappen and Red Bull Racing were inseparable, bound by a mixture of dominance, mutual confidence, and a machine of performance that seemed almost impossible to dismantle. But 2025 brought something that the sport had not felt in a long time: the tremor of uncertainty surrounding a top driver. It began quietly, as all big shifts in F1 begin. A whisper in a garage, a hint of frustration heard in a post-race interview, a look exchanged between team principals. And suddenly, the question that once sounded absurd started to echo with surprising force. Could Max Verstappen truly leave Red Bull and go to Mercedes? The mere suggestion carries weight, not because Mercedes is a stranger to greatness, but because the idea of Verstappen driving for the team that once was his greatest rival feels like something pulled from an alternate timeline. Yet the foundations of this possibility are more real than they appear. The Red Bull organizational structure went through turmoil, internal disputes, political battles, and cracks that no longer stay hidden from the cameras. What once looked like a fortress of stability began to resemble a house strained by too many competing interests. And for a driver like Max, who demands absolute unity around him, this is the first signal that the future might lie elsewhere. At the same time, Mercedes has been preparing for a new era. After years of trying to rebuild following the decline that began in 2022, the team found itself in a position where it needed a new reference, a new leader, someone who could carry the legacy left by Lewis Hamilton while pushing the team into the next competitive cycle. When Hamilton departed for Ferrari, the seat that once looked destined for a young hope suddenly became a throne waiting for a king. And there is no bigger king on the grid today than Max Verstappen. Toto Wolff, always strategic, never reacts impulsively. But his eyes have been on Max for years. Publicly, he keeps the same calm tone, insisting that Mercedes values long-term projects and driver development. Privately, however, there is a clear understanding. If the best driver in the world shows even the slightest opening, you must be ready. And Mercedes is ready. They have the structure, the financial power, and the long-term vision that appeal to a driver seeking not only performance but stability. Max knows that. His entourage knows that. And Wolff certainly knows that. The tension increased when subtle dissatisfaction began to leak from the Red Bull camp. Verstappen, while still dominant, grew visibly irritated with management conflicts and inconsistencies in decision-making. There were moments when he publicly questioned strategies, something unthinkable during Red Bull's peak harmony. Interviews became colder, radio messages sharper. He never said anything explicit, but Max is not a driver who speaks unintentionally. Every word, every inflection, every pause reveals something. And the paddock listened. Rumors spread rapidly that a performance clause or political clause in Max's contract could allow him to leave Red Bull earlier than expected. No one confirmed it, no one denied it convincingly, and in Formula One, that silence is louder than any statement. Suddenly, the idea of Verstappen wearing silver began to take shape not as a fantasy, but as a scenario that required careful analysis. Mercedes, after all, has something Red Bull cannot offer today: a clean slate. A team seeking rebirth, not preservation. A group hungry to restore its legacy after years of struggle. And Max Verstappen has always thrived in environments where he could shape the direction of the team, where the machinery was built around his driving style, where the engineers followed his instinct as if it were a compass. At Red Bull, he has reached the ceiling of what can be shaped. At Mercedes, he would become the foundation of a new cycle. There is also the psychological weight of legacy. Verstappen already has titles, records, and dominance. What he does not have is the symbol that Hamilton carries: the driver who built an era in one team. If Max were to join Mercedes and bring them back to championship-winning form, it would redefine the arc of his career. It would cement him not only as the most dominant driver of his generation, but as one of the greatest in the history of the sport. Such opportunities do not appear often, and Max knows the value of timing better than anyone. The paddock atmosphere only intensified when certain figures inside Red Bull began to push narratives that suggested internal power struggles. Christian Horner's controversies, disagreements between technical departments, and shifting roles within the team structure added fuel to the speculation. Max, who hates distractions more than anything, found himself surrounded by them. The stability he once praised no longer felt guaranteed. A driver of his caliber does not accept chaos. He either controls the environment or leaves it behind. Meanwhile, Mercedes continued its silent progression. The W16 development showed promising direction, and engineers hinted, discreetly, that the concept change they implemented was finally yielding the kind of consistency they had been searching for. A driver like Max could accelerate that evolution dramatically. His input on car development is legendary, his adaptation speed unmatched. The pairing of Mercedes' engineering discipline with Verstappen's relentless feedback is something that would terrify any rival. But beyond the technical and political dimensions lies one factor that might be the most decisive of all. Max Verstappen is not driven by comfort. He is driven by challenge. He has said it repeatedly in indirect ways. Dominating the same environment year after year becomes predictable. And predictability for someone like him is poison. He chases intensity, confrontation, purpose. If he senses that Red Bull is entering a phase of internal conflict and stagnation, while Mercedes rises from the ashes seeking revenge, the gravitational pull might become too powerful to resist. And then there is the personal dimension, the one few talk about openly but everyone understands. The rivalry between Mercedes and Red Bull defined much of Max's early peak years. To cross that line and become the leader of Mercedes would be a statement unlike any other. It would transform the narrative of his career, reshape the dynamics of the sport, and produce storylines that would echo for decades. For now, nothing is signed, nothing is confirmed, nothing is official. But the energy in the paddock is unmistakable. Engineers exchange glances. Journalists whisper. Team principals speak in coded language. Everyone senses that something is happening behind the curtains, something that could shift the entire balance of Formula One. Max Verstappen, the most dominant driver of his generation, stands at a crossroads. One path leads to the continuation of his Red Bull dynasty, the other to a new era dressed in silver. And for the first time in a long time, the second option is not only possible, it feels increasingly plausible.